In the previous lecture, I discussed the main kings of the Crusader period of the 12th century and some of the events they were involved in, but I didn't go into details. I'll get back to the historical sequence shortly. But meanwhile, let me ask a few questions about the Crusader society. Remember, these people come from abroad. What type of society was built by them in the Holy Land? Well, firstly, it is important to note that there were different components in the Crusader society. Not all of them were Western Europeans or Catholic Christians. Yes, they were the most important group. They were the leaders. They were the elite. They were those who controlled the country. So the Crusaders, or the Latins, or the Franks, as they would also be called, they were the elite, they were the rulers. But there were other Christians too, the Eastern or the Oriental Christian denominations that I mentioned earlier on in our lectures, such as the Syriacs, the Syrian Orthodox, or the Arameans as they're called, the Copts from Egypt, Armenians also, and so on and so forth. So we have Western Catholic churches and we have Eastern churches that are not Catholic. Along with them are the Muslims, large numbers of Muslims, not in Jerusalem, mind you. Muslims and Jews were not allowed to live in Jerusalem, but they were allowed to visit Jerusalem. So there are Muslims in the villages, in the cities all over the country, and of course also Jews. How many Jews? According to estimates, not more than 1,500 Jews, so it's not even a community. Small numbers of people spread all over the country. A few of the Jews are mentioned by a traveler named Benjamin from Tudela, Spain, who visited the country in 1170. It's almost the end of the Crusader period, and he says that there were 4 Jews living in Jerusalem. So that was an exception. And the reason they were allowed to live in Jerusalem was very simple. They were experts in dyeing fabrics, that is, in the textile industry. And of course, the Crusaders, just like anyone else, would like to have nice, fancy clothes, so they needed the service of these Jews, and they allowed some of them to live in Jerusalem. But in general, Jews were not allowed into the holy city. The Crusaders, as I said, the Western Catholics were obviously the elite. What about the rest of them? Is there a kind of a dividing line between the Western Catholic Christians and the other groups? Well, obviously you'd assume that Jews and Muslims were at the bottom of the social ladder. But what about the Eastern, the Oriental Christians? Were they part of the elite perhaps? Surprisingly enough, they weren't. The main division line within Crusader society was an ethnic line and not a religious line. If it were a religious line, then Eastern Christians, that is Oriental Christians, and Western Catholic Christians would be on the same side. But no, Oriental Christians were considered by the Catholics as similar to Muslims and Jews, almost in all respects. Perhaps except for the fact that you could enslave a Muslim and a Jew, but by law you couldn't enslave an Oriental Christian. But that was the only benefit. Other than that, they were considered to be at the lowest ranks of society. In general, the Crusader society was a feudal society. What does it mean? It means that there's the king and there's the nobility, the lords or the seniors or the vassals as they're called, the high nobles. Each of them has his own small army. The king has an army, his private army. The lords have their own private army. And when the king goes to battle, he has to ask for the support of his subjects, the high-ranking subjects. How do you gain their support? How do you convince them to give you their soldiers to go into battle? Well, you promise them a feodum. A feodum is basically a present, a gift of land. So you give them a piece of land, and in return they help you in the battlefield. Hence, the regime is known as the feudal regime. It is basically the same regime that we find in Europe at the same time. So no wonder we have a feudal society here in the Holy Land. And of course, next to the Christians, the Muslims, the Jews, and all of them, we also have the church. The church in the Crusader kingdom is led by a patriarch. He's the head of the church, and he resides in Jerusalem, not far from the Holy Sepulchre Church. He's the patriarch, and there are bishops and priests, and of course monks in monasteries. Now, what were the main political powers in the Crusader society in the 12th century and the 13th century? Well, to begin with, there's the king. We said that the king has his own political power. He is the first among equals, so to speak, but he is actually the real boss. He has his own army, and his subjects are the nobility, okay, the lords. Each lord has his own territory. The most important of them, of course, have their own territory. So some of them control the region of Galilee, others control the region of the coastal plain, and so on and so forth. But there's also an additional power which is unique to the Crusader state, and these are the communes. What are communes? The term communes comes from the term communal, something which is done by people together, but obviously it doesn't really help understand what it means. In Europe, communes is a title given to the first cities. People live together, communally, together, and therefore it's the commune of this or that city. It's the people of the city. In the Holy Land, the term commune has a different meaning. The term commune in the Holy Land refers to a neighborhood or a quarter in some of the cities, not in every city, in only the main portal cities, naval cities on the seashores. And the people of these neighborhoods or districts are people from a certain commune or a city in Europe. Let me give you an example. The city of Genova in Italy, or the city of Venice in Italy, have a branch in the city of Akko, in the Crusader kingdom. Not in Jerusalem, not in Ashkelon, in Akko and in Akko alone. They don't need much more than that. That branch, that neighborhood, is autonomous in many respects. It has its leader, it has a free tax trade, it has its own church, it has its own bakery, bathhouse, and so on and so forth. It is autonomous, it is not independent, as they are part of the Crusader kingdom, but they are autonomous. They have extremely power, military power, beyond their economical importance. How's that? Remember, these people are merchants. They have ships. The Crusader kingdom, the king, does not have ships. There is no Crusader navy. So when the Crusaders in the 12th century needed to lay siege to cities such as Akko, for instance, they had to ask for the help of the local communes. And the local commune says, gladly, but we have a price. And the price is that you, the king, grant us a certain part of the city, which will be ours, free tax trade. You don't get anything from our trade unless we decide to give it to you, and territories outside the city. Take it or leave it. And the king had to take it because he had no other way to blockade the city of Akko from the sea during a siege. So he gave them whatever they wanted. And then came Venice with the same demands, and Pisa with similar demands, and so on and so forth. So the communes became extremely powerful within the kingdom. So there's the king, the nobility, and the communes. But there's also an even more powerful political entity, and these are the knights' orders. We've already explained what knights are. Knights are noblemen riding on horses and serving as professional warriors. They are the backbone of the power of the Crusader kingdom, and also other kingdoms in Europe, of course. But these knights are unique. In the Holy Land, something totally new grew out of the Crusader society. Knights who are also, at the same time, monks. Now, this is quite peculiar, an impossibility, if you ask my opinion. From a Christian perspective, a knight, by definition, cannot be a monk, because a monk makes the link, he's the mediator between man and God. To be a mediator, he has to be pure. He cannot shed blood. Knights, on the other hand, by definition, by profession, shed blood of people. That's what they do to live, for living. That's what they do to protect the kingdom. How can a knight become a monk? Well, because the Crusaders really needed manpower, they managed to get the permit from the leading theological authorities in Europe for creating a special order of knights who are also monks, a very attractive structure for young people in Europe. How come? Well, simply by defining things differently. We thought that knights cannot be monks because knights shed blood. They basically murder people, right? That's a problem. Well, you can look at it differently. If you determine, for instance, that killing the Muslim enemy who serves Satan is not a murder, then knights are fine. They can be monks and mediators between the community and God. It was an ingenious solution, and it worked extremely well. And 3 orders were created already during the time of the First Crusader kingdom. One of them are very well known in the Western world, the Knight Templars. The Knight Templars were established in Jerusalem. Actually, at the beginning they were named the Poor Knights of Jesus. But when the king of the Crusader kingdom left Al-Aqsa Mosque and moved to his new palace next to Jaffa Gate, there was a vacancy on the Temple Mount, so the Knight Templars came in. And once they got in, they also acquired the name the Poor Knights of Jesus and the Temple, because they were in the Temple of Solomon, as they believed. Hence the Knight Templars, the Knights of the Temple. The other important order of knights is the Hospitaller order, also known as St. John order. The Hospitallers are named so because they basically, yes, they were warriors, but they basically worked on a daily basis in hospitals, taking care of the needy, the poor, and the sick. That was their main goal. And the third one, the third order, was the Lazarite order. Now, in the New Testament, there's a story about a man called Lazarus, who was very sick. He was ill. He had wounds all over his body. And in Christian interpretation, it was thought that he was actually a leper. He was a just person, and when he died, he went to heaven. That's according to the New Testament. It is a parable told by Jesus. Early Christians understood this parable as a historical story. and they believe that Lazarus is a real person. Actually, in some traditions, Lazarus is actually identified with the other Lazarus, Elazar, who was revived by Jesus. Okay, so if so, he's a real person, he's a saint now. He became the patron saint of the lepers in Europe and in the Crusader kingdom. And when an order of lepers, leper warriors, was established in the Holy Land, they were called the Lazarite order. These three orders were established in Jerusalem during the 12th century in the time of the First Crusader kingdom, before 1187. Another order was established a couple of years later, after the establishment of the Second Crusader kingdom, and these were the German Knights. They were much like the Hospitallers, only they addressed German-speaking people, German-speaking sick people, poor people, and so on. Hence they were called the Teutonic Knights, the Teutonic Knights. Teutonic means German in medieval times. So altogether we have four main orders. There were more, but less important, and these orders now became the backbone of the army of the Crusaders in the Holy Land. The power of the king, the power of the nobility, the power of the communes on one hand, and they are equaled by the power of the three and later four orders of knights. Altogether, the kingdom had about 600 knights, and the knight orders had another 600 knights. So altogether we're talking about 1,200 knights. So it is a considerable power, and the knights have a major part in it. They were also those who actually held the fortresses, the dozens of fortresses built all over the country by the king and by the orders. They were held by these orders all over the country. So this is the political and military powers in the Crusader kingdoms in the 12th century.